The Prime Minister is beginning his tour of the UK's nations today. Sir Keir Starmer is travelling first to Scotland, where he'll meet the First Minister and SNP leader John Swinney. Yesterday, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, held his first cabinet meeting and spent his first full day in Downing Street. Earlier, my colleague Geeta Gurumurthy spoke to Sam White, he's the former Chief of Staff to Sir Keir Starmer, and Caroline Slowcock, who is former Private Secretary to Conservative Prime Ministers Margaret Thatcher and John Major, and the director of the think tank Civil Exchange. She started by asking Sam White if he ever thought Labour could win such a big majority.
I went to work for Keir maybe 3 or 4 days after he got elected leader of the Labour Party, running his strategy during COVID. And at the time, my motivation was I thought we'd had a long period of really poor government in the UK and a period where the Labour Party had largely exited the pitch of serious politics. Arguably Labour, as Michael Heseltine has said in the past, can win any election it chooses to. It just has to choose to do it. And I wanted to help Keir bring the party back from the brink of a near extinction level event, as the Tories have experienced this week, back to being a credible alternative government. And I did believe it was possible. I went back to work for him a second time in 22 as his Chief of Staff. And I remember meeting donors who said to me, yeah, it's all very well, but this guy's not going to win, is he? You're losers. You're not going to come back from this. You can't really believe it. And people like Deborah Mattison and I said, no, we've left our jobs. We've come to do this because there is a narrow route back. It's like, that bit in the Avengers movie where they're fighting Thanos and Doctor Strange looks into all the different futures and there's like 1 million futures and they win in one of them. It's an incredibly narrow path full of self-sacrifice and bravery, and that's the path we decided to take.
OK, we'll come back to that thought in a moment, but Caroline, just let me bring you in. Are you surprised by the distance travel, first of all? And there is a huge change, isn't there, in the direction of government that will happen now, both for ministers and for civil service?
Yes, I mean, obviously it's a historic moment, and they're now setting out to try and deliver some of the things that they promised. And I think the most fundamental thing is trust. And Keir Starmer made a very big pitch in his speech on the steps of Number 10 to restore trust, calling it a wound that needs to be healed. And we're now looking for the actions, not just the words. And actually, on that day, civil society leaders, experts and others wrote to him to say, these are the actions that you need to take to restore trust. And they include setting up that new Ethics and Integrity Commission he's promised, and sticking to really high standards, committing to the rule of law, and actually respecting key democratic institutions, which have recently been really trashed. Institutions like the civil service, civil society itself, the BBC, and others. And really having stronger parliamentary accountability is so important when you've got such a big majority, including not sidestepping Parliament through the abuse of secondary legislation to avoid proper scrutiny, and bringing the country together in real partnership. Now, you can do these things without massive resources. They're actually easy to do in lots of ways. But if you do them well and restore that trust, you will unlock a lot of resources in society. It's not just the government, civil service, big though the big resources though they are, and the money that they may pour into it, but it's also the wider resources of society as a whole, including voluntary organisations, for example, across the country, who, if we can create a shared purpose, will work with them and make some of these things real.
What instincts will govern which policy choices he goes down the route of when provided with different solutions?
Yeah, so values-wise, his values, I think, are pretty evident and pretty strong, and they are about things like public service, about integrity in public life, and about making society fairer. I don't know if you saw, GB News had an interview with him shortly after the Sky News, sorry to mention competitors, debate where Keir had talked about his father being a toolmaker. It's true. You didn't hear it from me, but that's true. And they laughed at him when he said, my dad worked in a factory. And he was genuinely angry in this GB News clip, and said, my father would say this to people at social events and they would pause afterwards. They didn't know what to say to him, and he felt disrespected because of the place he sat in society. And the reason I bring that up is because with Keir, it was genuine anger, hit him in a nerve. There's this sense that society is a bit snobby. It is a bit... there's less chance for social mobility. People are judged on where they've come from. People are disrespected for doing manual work, factory work, all sorts of important parts of what actually makes our country a success. So these are the values I think that you're going to see instinctively kind of come out in his approach to politics, but they will be tempered by what actually works. We're not here to be the party of protest. We're not here for performative politics. We're here to actually try and change the country from one of its worst inheritances, certainly in my lifetime, to something where we restore some trust back in the public.
OK, Caroline, I mean, in terms of the public demand now from this government, obviously there are a lot of huge problems. In your experience, how long does it actually take to deliver the kind of change that people might expect to see? I know that's a tough question. Do you think, are we looking at the end of the whole parliament? Are we looking sort of 4 or 5 years? Is it likely that governments can, bring change on public services within a couple of years?
I think that it is a long-term project to do some of these things. For example, the NHS, you can put in extra resources, which obviously they're planning to do in terms of appointments, and you can make some reforms. But probably the deeper reform is to invest in prevention, which actually would take a lot of the strain off the NHS and put in place a much better system of social care. And these things do take time, so that we're probably looking at 2 terms for a really fundamental change. But what you can do is you can change the style of government very quickly. And, back to my point earlier, I think you can actually start to unlock resources in society. So change will happen. But I think to get the big, deep changes that we need to see, we're probably looking at least to the end of 5 years and possibly 2 terms, which, of course, is the idea behind the mission-driven government, the decade of renewal. What you really need when you are achieving change, from my experience of working for Margaret Thatcher, who had 3 terms, is you really do need to keep your eye on the ball. There are massive distractions out there. She didn't read the newspapers. She just got a brief summary every morning. She focused on driving through the things that she really wanted to achieve. And that's what Keir Starmer needs to do, and not be distracted by, probably a pretty hostile media and many things which are thrown at you as you go along as a Prime Minister, and really try to get the fundamentals right. And a lot of that is happening not at the top of government, but actually at the front line of services. And he needs to really unlock that potential there, I think.